And not just in transportation, I'm thinking
In
like
everything.
In everything.
Right. And that is the incremental process that has to happen. But part of the problem when we talk about planning and even things like transit, people say, oh, we have so many problems today with transit, how can we think about new solutions? The fact is, if somebody thought of these solutions 30 years ago, and so we have to think about the next 30 years worth of solutions, and they can't be the same as today.
Exactly.
And so how do we think about it differently? How do we get the users of the system to help us think about it differently, and not just those that have already done it? It's really widening the tent of having people in to talk about how we make a difference.
Well, it's like, you know, what you just said. We can apply it to our own lives. A lot of us say, oh, I can't save for retirement. I'm trying to pay the mortgage this month. You know, I can't do that. Well, you know, it's going to come whether you plan for it or not.
Exactly. Exactly. And you have to start thinking about it. It's easy for government in particular to solve today's problems, to try to focus on today's problems. How's that? To focus on today's problems.
Okay,
but really, it's how do we think about difference? How do we? And I say it takes courage to make change, and it really does. And do we have the courage to make the kind of fundamental change that is going to make our region better? That's going to make our communities stronger. That's really what this process wants to talk about.
So somehow, Randy, I get the impression that you're not just talking about widening the expressway and having it be 5 lanes or something like that.
No, we're really not talking about that. I think that we're talking about, ultimately, there is a piece of how do we make public investments. I mean, that's part of the planning process. Where do we spend public dollars? But it's really much more than that. It's really about the 3 key things in our plan and our vision are equity. We talk about what's equitable in the region, what do we do with equity. It's sustainability. How do we create a region that sustains itself? And it's innovation. How do we do things in a smarter, different way? And how do we make a region that those 3 things are the cornerstone of making change in the region and making change in the way we do business and the way we live our lives?
So let's talk for a moment about sustainability. I know that here in Chicago there's a couple of very high-profile buildings that are going up that are going to be completely green. We had an opportunity not too long ago to visit a farm in Indiana that uses no public electricity. They completely generate their own electricity, and it's completely self-sustaining. Well, first of all, is sustainability in that sense attractive to the planners? And then my second question, Mr. President, will be, and my follow-up will be, and how do the utility companies feel about that?
Yeah, I think it is part of what we think about when we talk about planning. But sustainability isn't just environmental sustainability. It's economic sustainability. It's a whole bigger picture when we talk about it. Environment's a big piece of that, but it's not the only piece. We have to look at more energy efficient buildings. There's just no other option but to look in this direction. We've got to become more energy self-sufficient, and that means greener buildings. That means greener communities. Has to happen. And I think the energy companies understand that, and I think that they're trying to figure out what their role is in creation of what we call green energy. How do they play a part in it? How does ComEd become a player in producing green energy?
They start producing solar plant panels,
and
right?
And how do we deal with things like wind, and how do we deal with other sustainable energy issues? But we want to look at sustainability in a bigger way, and that's really where we think we can talk about this regionally. I mean, sustainability in the natural resources overall, the kinds of biodiversity that we have in this region. When you look at an urban area like Chicago, you don't see the kind of diversity in the biology that we have here. You don't see in most major cities the kind of park system that we have. And so we've got to look at how we sustain and build on that as well.
Very interesting. If I'm not mistaken, you brought some pictures to show me. Is that right?
We must have.
All right, let's take a look over there and see if there's something you want to explain to me.
This is part of our community conversations and what we talked about earlier, and just bringing people together and talking about the future. We're looking here at a map, and people are saying, where do we want people to live? How do we want them to move around the region? But this is the type of activity that we think is so important in getting our residents involved. Okay. Our partners and the other public interest groups, they know how to get involved in the system. So how do we get our residents and the people that this is all about, how it impacts them every day. How do we get them talking about this?
And are these people volunteers, or were they invited, or did they go to the website? Or
generally, they are people that we have invited through one of our partner organizations or others that we've tried to put something together. We also have on our website a place where if you want to hold a community conversation, you can contact us, we'll set it up, we'll help you go through it, and really that's what we want to do. We want people to come together in their own mechanisms, not us telling them we want you, you, and you, but what works for you, what works for your neighborhood, what works for your community, what works for the people you work with. How can we get them together to talk?
Okay, so I took you all the way back to the beginning of our conversation. You said the first thing was the vision, and I cut you off there, but you were going to move from there.
We were going to move. It's not just about the vision, as we
Right.
said. It's about the strategy analysis that we're doing now. We're doing things like, and this is more of a technical piece, but it's important that we say things like, people use the word transit-oriented development, which is, housing and jobs near train stations and near CTA stops, and it's a good thing. But what does it really mean? Does it make any difference if we do that? So there's some technical work that's going on. But the real piece that's important to us is we're going to create different scenarios or different packages of strategies to get to that vision. And we're going to ask the public to help us think about which sets of strategies work best in some kind of an interactive way, in some kind of a way that's not just answering a survey, but where it's fun. I mean, and we really think that's what it has to be. It has to be fun, has to be innovative. And then we can get people to talk about that.
I imagine Legos,
Well, and that is ways that people have done it in the past. There are ways we can do it with PCs and with this video displays and just having people walk through. We think it's important that we are able to visualize what this future means. It's not just enough to say we need more parks. It needs to be, what does that mean? What does it look like? And so we need to put some pictures together so that people can say, I like this better than I like this, and here's why. So that's really where we'll be spending next summer. We're doing this in conjunction with the 100th anniversary of Daniel Burnham's Plan of Chicago, which is in 2009. And so there's an opportunity to really have a partner of the past, what we're talking about here in the present and what's happened, and then the future. And so this is a real opportunity for us to bring more people into the process, get them more involved, and talk about planning, and we hope is a fun way, and a way that we can get more people involved.
It sounds really exciting and really interesting, and I'm thinking as I'm listening to you how important it is to stay ahead of the game with these plans. I'm thinking about in some of the suburbs where the baby boomers went to school, and overnight, all these schools were built like crazy because there was no place to put all these kids, right? Well, now all these kids, have grandchildren, and there's not as many. I think the population has gone down some because I noticed some of the schools are now being used for other things.
Right.
And, as I'm listening, I'm thinking pretty soon they're going to have to turn them into convalescent homes because all these baby boomers, are all getting older. But it's that kind of thing where you don't really want your state and your municipality and the whole region to be constantly in a reactive stance.
Right.
What I'm understanding is that this is really how important it is to have a proactive.
Absolutely, and I think that we have to look at, we've got a huge investment in things like schools out there. So before we build a new school anywhere, we ought to ask, is this the right way for the region to develop? Is this the right way that we ought to be planning our communities? Or do we need to use what we have already in a better way? And I think that's part of it. That's part of the redevelopment of the region that's going to have to happen over the next 30 years. Towns like Schaumburg and Arlington Heights and Yorkville are now going to be old towns in 2040. They're not going to be new towns anymore. And so how do we make sure that we're continuing to use the assets that the taxpayers have already paid for? So thinking that far out it has to be where we go. It has to, you have to plan ahead. Otherwise, we're just stuck in the same reactive mode, and we end up never doing all the right things.
Very interesting. So for our viewers this evening, it sounds like one of the things is that you'd like them to visit the website?
Absolutely. The go2040.com is the website. It's where we have all kinds of information. We have interactive activities. We write blog sites there that and a lot of them are just